What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed you in the worst possible way? After discovering his wife's infidelity, one man stages an elaborate plan to test her loyalty and her humanity. Faking a terminal illness, he creates a series of heart-wrenching dilemmas that force her to choose between him and her lover. As the truth unfolds, he documents her every decision, exposing her betrayal in a way no one could ignore. But when revenge consumes him, he's left questioning, was it worth it? And where does he go from here?
It started with the smallest of things. A message notification quickly swiped away, the sudden change in the scent of her perfume, or the way her laughter lingered just a little longer when she spoke on the phone. I didn't want to believe it. For 20 years, we'd built a life together, raising children, sharing dreams, and weathering storms that would have broken lesser couples. But there it was, subtle, gnawing at the edges of my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. She thought she was careful, and maybe she was, but I've always been observant. A stray receipt tucked into her purse from a restaurant I didn't recognize. Weekend errands that stretched into hours. An unusual brightness in her demeanor. A glow that I knew wasn't mine to claim. At first, I told myself it was paranoia, a cruel joke played by my insecurities. But then I saw the text. It popped up on her phone while she was in the shower. The words were innocuous enough, but the name? It was a man I didn't know, and the tone of the exchange was far too familiar. Can't wait to see you again. I stared at the screen, the blood pounding in my ears. My hands trembled as I scrolled up. The conversation was brief, but left no doubt about what had been happening behind my back. I didn't confront her. Not then. Not yet. I knew better than to act in anger or desperation. Instead, I sat with the knowledge, letting it churn inside me. I replayed every recent conversation, every shared meal, every kiss goodnight. The realization that they'd all been tainted by her deceit made my skin crawl. But this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about control, or rather, the lack of it. She'd stolen something from me, something sacred. I wouldn't let her have the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she'd wounded me. If she wanted to play games, I would show her just how far I could take it. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully. A storm of plans began to take shape in my mind. I wouldn't just expose her betrayal. I'd make her feel it, truly feel it. And so, the seeds of my revenge were sown, quietly, methodically, with all the patience of a man who has nothing left to lose. Anger is too simple a word for what I felt. It wasn't just rage. It was humiliation, sorrow, disbelief, all tangled into a knot that seemed to tighten around my chest with every passing day. The knowledge of her betrayal didn't just hurt. It unmade me, unraveling the man I thought I was. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every moment was a reel of imagined scenarios, of them together, laughing, touching, sharing secrets that were supposed to be ours. I wanted to confront her, scream, demand answers, but each time I pictured the conversation, I realized how little power I had. She would deny it, twist the narrative, maybe even blame me. No, I couldn't risk giving her the upper hand. Instead, I withdrew into myself. I became an actor in my own home, playing the role of the oblivious husband. I smiled when she spoke, laughed when she told stories, even kissed her as if nothing had changed. It was excruciating, but it was necessary. The more she believed I was unaware, the more freedom I had to plan my next move. And yet, the facade took its toll. There were nights when the weight of it all became unbearable. I'd sit in the car for hours after work, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to drive off into the night and never come back. Other times, I'd stare at our wedding photos, wondering how we'd gone from those smiles, those promises, to this. But amidst the pain, a clarity began to emerge. I realized that confronting her directly wasn't enough. If I truly wanted justice, or maybe just closure, I needed to show her what betrayal felt like, to make her question every choice she'd made. And so, the idea of the illness was born. It was a desperate plan, but it was elegant in its simplicity. By pretending to be sick, I could pull her into my world, force her to choose between me and him. It would be her decisions, not my accusations, that revealed her true character. And if she failed, well, I'd have the evidence to show everyone who she really was. That night, as I lay awake beside her again, I felt something new: resolve. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into a sharp, focused energy. If she had turned our marriage into a game, then I would play to win. The day I decided to fake my illness, I felt a strange sense of peace. For weeks, I'd been consumed by anger and despair, but now I had a plan. It wasn't just about exposing her lies. It was about reclaiming the power she thought she'd taken from me. If she wanted to deceive me, then I'd show her how deception was truly done. The setup had to be perfect. I started by visiting a doctor, feigning symptoms that could mimic a serious condition. Fatigue, weight loss, dizziness. I listed them all, carefully chosen from late-night internet searches. The doctor ordered a battery of tests, but I already knew the results would be inconclusive. That was part of the plan. When nothing definitive came back, I pressed the narrative further, suggesting a possible underlying condition, something severe and mysterious. When I told her the news, I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. She tried to mask it, of course, rushing to my side, stroking my hair, murmuring reassurances that rang hollow. But I could see it, the hesitation, the fear, not for me, but for what this would mean for her and her lover. Would she be able to maintain both lives now that I needed her full attention? I began to build the illusion brick by brick. I groaned softly as I rose from the couch, winced as I climbed the stairs. My appetite became selective, my energy levels erratic. I started leaving medical brochures in plain sight, subtle hints of my supposed condition. And when she asked how I was feeling, I'd sigh heavily and offer vague responses, enough to keep her guessing, but not enough to confirm anything. It worked better than I expected. At first, she hovered, fussing over me like a dutiful wife. But it didn't take long before the cracks began to show. Her phone calls to friends became more frequent. She'd step outside for air just a little too often. I pretended not to notice, allowing her to believe I was too weak, too distracted by my illness to suspect a thing. Inside, though, I felt a dark satisfaction. Every lie she told, every moment of neglect, was another piece of evidence for what I was building. Because while she thought I was slipping away, I was documenting everything: photos, recordings, even journal entries detailing her choices. The plan wasn't just about exposing her. It was about creating a narrative she couldn't escape. By the time I was finished, there would be no room for excuses, no chance to rewrite the story. She would face the truth in its entirety, laid bare for everyone to see. Creating the perfect environment to test her loyalty required patience and precision. I couldn't rush it. Every detail had to be carefully thought out, every move calculated to keep her in the dark. The goal wasn't just to watch her fail. It was to make her choices undeniable, irrefutable evidence of where her heart truly lay. I started small, crafting situations that seemed innocent on the surface. "I need you to help me with the bills this month," I told her one evening, feigning financial strain as part of my declining health. She hesitated for a moment before agreeing, her voice overly cheerful. But 2 days later, I overheard her complaining to someone on the phone about how tight money had become, never once mentioning my condition. Next, I created moments where she had to choose between spending time with me or keeping her appointments with him. "I don't think I can manage dinner alone tonight," I'd say softly, watching her face for the telltale flicker of guilt. Most times, she'd make an excuse, promising to make it up to me later. But I knew where she was going, and the GPS tracker on her car confirmed it. The more I tested her, the bolder I became. One weekend, I staged a particularly elaborate scenario. I told her I'd been feeling weaker than usual and might need to go to the hospital if things got worse. It was a test, one that would force her to choose between staying by my side or disappearing for another errand. Predictably, she left, mumbling something about groceries. I waited until she was gone before calling her phone, my voice strained with fake panic. "I think I need to go to the ER," I said. Her pause on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "I'm stuck in traffic," she lied. "Can you call a neighbor?" Every choice she made, every betrayal, was carefully recorded. I'd positioned discreet cameras around the house, capturing her every interaction with me. When she stepped out for her clandestine meetings, I saved screenshots of her GPS locations. There would be no denying the truth when the time came. But the piece de resistance was yet to come. I needed one final, undeniable moment, a breaking point where her loyalty would be tested beyond repair. I began laying the groundwork for this ultimate confrontation, knowing it would define everything that followed. And yet, as I set the stage, I couldn't ignore the pangs of doubt creeping into my mind. Was I becoming as deceitful as her? Was this revenge worth the cost of what little humanity I had left? The thought lingered, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about morality. It was about justice, or so I told myself. The games were no longer just tests of her loyalty. They became an art form, carefully crafted layers of manipulation designed to unmask her for who she truly was. If my revenge was a symphony, this was the crescendo, each note building toward the inevitable reveal. I began by creating scenarios that forced her to prioritize. "I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow," I'd say, watching her reaction carefully. "It's pretty important, but I can manage alone if you're busy." Her response was always predictable. Vague promises to try and make it, followed by a last-minute excuse that conveniently aligned with her disappearing act. Then I escalated. I started pretending to struggle with basic tasks, getting out of bed, carrying groceries, even climbing the stairs. I wanted her to feel the weight of my supposed frailty, to see how much I needed her. Most of the time, she'd sigh and step in reluctantly, her forced smile barely masking her impatience. Other times, she'd leave entirely, mumbling something about errands. But the most elaborate games were the ones where I involved other people, friends, family, even neighbors. I'd confide in them, spinning a narrative of my declining health, ensuring they'd check in on me. When she wasn't around to play the supportive wife, her absence became glaringly obvious to everyone. It was a subtle but effective way of shifting the perception, building my case not just in private, but in the court of public opinion. One evening, I staged what I considered my most intricate scenario yet. I invited a few close friends over for dinner, emphasizing how important it was to have her there. She, of course, made an excuse, claiming to feel unwell. The truth, as always, lay in the GPS coordinates I tracked to a restaurant on the other side of town. During the dinner, I made sure to highlight her absence. "She wanted to be here," I said with a faint, practiced sadness, "but she's been under a lot of stress lately, taking care of me." The sympathetic nods from my friends were all I needed to know that the seeds of doubt had been planted. The psychological games weren't just about her choices. They were about creating a narrative that others would believe when the truth finally came out. By the time I was done, her betrayal wouldn't just be my story. It would be undeniable fact in the eyes of everyone who mattered. Still, I couldn't shake the growing darkness within me. Every lie I told, every scenario I constructed, chipped away at something inside me. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a transformation, and I wasn't sure who I'd become when it was over. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening, a night I'd orchestrated down to the finest detail. By now, I'd conditioned her to believe my health was teetering on the edge, my illness a shadow that hung over every conversation, every shared glance. But this time, I needed her to confront the full weight of her choices. I told her that I wasn't feeling well, worse than usual. My voice trembled as I described symptoms I'd carefully rehearsed: dizziness, chest tightness, a sense of impending doom. "I think it's serious," I murmured, clutching the armrest of the couch for effect. "I need you here tonight." Her face betrayed a flicker of annoyance before it softened into a mask of concern. "Of course," she said too quickly. "I'll just take care of a few things first." I knew what that meant. I'd already placed a tracking device in her car, the same one that had revealed every rendezvous with him over the past months. What she didn't know was that I had backup plans for backup plans. The cameras were rolling, the audio recorders capturing every word. Even as she slipped out the door, muttering something about groceries, I was setting the stage for her final betrayal. Hours passed, each one sharpening the knife of anticipation. When she returned, her makeup hastily reapplied and her excuses just as rehearsed as my symptoms, I asked the question that would seal her fate. "Where were you?" The silence that followed was deafening. She stumbled over her words, spinning a tale so thin it practically unraveled in front of me. I didn't press her, didn't need to. Instead, I simply nodded, my face blank, my resolve steely. Later that night, I unveiled the piece de resistance, a staged medical emergency. I collapsed on the kitchen floor, clutching my chest, gasping for breath. Her reaction, or lack thereof, was the moment everything crystallized. She didn't panic. She didn't call for help. Instead, she hesitated, her hand hovering over her phone before putting it down entirely. "I think you're fine," she said, her voice tinged with irritation. "You just need to rest." That was it, the breaking point. The moment I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the woman I'd built my life with had chosen someone else over me, even as I played the part of a dying man. I lay there on the cold tile floor, my breathing slowing as I watched her walk away. The camera hidden in the corner captured it all, the final piece of evidence I needed. It wasn't just her betrayal that would be exposed. It was her complete lack of empathy, her indifference to the man she'd once sworn to love. The footage was raw, unfiltered, and devastating. Each clip was a piece of the puzzle, fragments that painted the full picture of her betrayal. I spent nights in front of my computer, piecing it all together like a director crafting his masterpiece. Only this wasn't a work of fiction. This was my life, our life, and the truth I'd been living with for months was finally ready to be shared. The opening scene was deliberate. A shot of me sitting in the doctor's office, recounting symptoms that didn't exist. The camera angle, captured on my phone, highlighted my pale expression, my hands fidgeting in my lap. "It could be serious," the doctor had said, his words becoming the foundation of the lie I'd sold her. From there, the narrative unfolded. Every recording, every snippet of audio, every GPS location told the same story. Her excuses, her absences, her lies. They were all there, laid bare for anyone to see. But it wasn't just her words that condemned her. It was her actions, or lack thereof. The final clips, where she dismissed my stage collapse, were the most damning of all. I added text overlays to contextualize the scenes, ensuring there was no room for ambiguity. While I struggled to breathe, she left to see him. When I asked for her help, this is where she went. The images of her car parked outside his building, timestamps clearly visible, left no doubt about her priorities. The soundtrack was subtle, instrumental music that swelled during moments of betrayal and quieted during scenes of my fabricated suffering. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about creating an atmosphere that mirrored the storm inside me. When the documentary was finished, I watched it from beginning to end. It was nearly an hour long, a painful but necessary testament to what I'd endured. The emotional weight of it was almost unbearable, but I knew it had to be seen. The next step was deciding who would watch it. I started small. Our closest friends, the people who had supported us through anniversaries, birthdays, and holidays. I invited them over under the guise of a heartfelt announcement, keeping my demeanor somber but composed. As the documentary played, the room was silent. I didn't need to narrate or explain. The images spoke for themselves. By the time the credits rolled, there were no questions left to ask. She had betrayed me, not just in secret, but in ways that revealed a deeper truth about who she had become. I didn't look at her during the screening. I didn't need to. Her silence, her avoidance of my gaze, was louder than any defense she could have mounted. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The fallout was swift and brutal. Once the documentary was shared, it spread like wildfire among our friends and family. The reactions poured in shock, disbelief, anger. The weight of the truth left little room for interpretation, and the life she had carefully curated began to crumble under the scrutiny. Her phone started ringing the next morning. I heard the muffled voices of her parents, the sharp edges of their disapproval cutting through the walls of the house. Friends texted me directly, expressing their outrage and sorrow, some asking how I had endured it for so long without breaking. Others, who had always admired her, simply couldn't believe what they had seen. At first, she tried to deny it. She accused me of manipulating the footage, of taking things out of context. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too meticulously detailed to dismiss. The timestamps, the receipts, the locations, they all told the same story. Her desperate attempts at damage control only made her look guiltier. She begged me to delete the documentary, to stop the humiliation from spreading any further. "This is private," she shouted one evening, her voice cracking under the weight of her shame. But I simply stared at her, silent and unmoving. Private? After what she had done, privacy was no longer her privilege. The reckoning extended beyond her personal life. At her workplace, whispers began to circulate. Colleagues who had once admired her professionalism now viewed her with suspicion. Social media wasn't kind either. Though I hadn't uploaded the documentary publicly, word of mouth was enough to ignite speculation and judgment. For me, the reckoning was bittersweet. I had achieved what I set out to do: expose her betrayal, make her face the consequences of her actions. But it didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, I felt hollow, as if the act of revenge had carved out the last remnants of the man I used to be. One evening, as she sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale and drawn, she finally said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "Why are you doing this to me?" I turned to her, my voice calm and steady. "I didn't do this to you," I said. "You did." The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling between us like a stone. For the first time, she had no retort, no clever excuse. She simply looked away, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade finally splitting wide open. But even as I watched her unravel, I couldn't shake the question that had been gnawing at me for weeks. Was it enough? Would it ever be enough? Revenge isn't the clean break you imagine it to be. Even as I watched her life collapse under the weight of her choices, the satisfaction I thought would come never arrived. Instead, there was an emptiness, a gnawing question that refused to leave me. What had I truly gained? Her betrayal had hurt, yes, but in orchestrating her downfall, I discovered something darker within myself. I had become the very thing I despised: manipulative, deceitful, willing to destroy someone to ease my own pain. Had I crossed a line, or had she forced me to? The distinction blurred more with each passing day. I found myself replaying the events in my mind. Was there a moment where I could have stopped, chosen a different path? Perhaps when I first discovered her infidelity, when I still had the option to confront her honestly. But honesty had felt inadequate then, too small a weapon to wield against the devastation she'd caused. There were moments of clarity, fleeting but powerful, when I questioned whether I had punished her too harshly. Her reputation was in shambles, her social circle reduced to whispers and side glances. At home, she was a shell of the person she once pretended to be, her confidence stripped away, her composure unraveling. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel pity. I told myself she deserved this, that her actions had led us here, but deep down, I wondered if I had lost something in the process, my own humanity perhaps. Friends who had seen the documentary reached out, offering their support. Some called me brave for exposing the truth, while others quietly hinted that I might have gone too far. Their words lingered, unspoken judgments that fed the growing unease inside me. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of our living room, I caught my reflection in the darkened TV screen. The man staring back at me was unfamiliar, harder, colder, consumed by his own bitterness. For all my planning and precision, I hadn't anticipated this, the weight of what revenge does to the one who seeks it. Still, I couldn't bring myself to undo it. The damage was done, the consequences irreversible. And as much as I questioned my own morality, I couldn't deny one truth. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. But as I sat there, the silence pressing in around me, a new thought began to form, a question that scared me more than anything else. What now? The days that followed were eerily quiet. The chaos had subsided, but in its place was an oppressive stillness that made every second feel heavier than the last. She moved around the house like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her voice barely more than a whisper when she spoke at all. And I had become something worse, an observer in my own life, waiting for a resolution that might never come. There were no more games to play, no more plans to set in motion. The documentary had done its job, exposing her betrayal and unraveling the image she had so carefully crafted. But as the dust settled, I realized the victory I thought I'd achieved was as hollow as the life we now shared. I spent hours in my office, scrolling through the messages from friends and family. Some offered support, others asked questions I couldn't bring myself to answer. "What happens now?" they asked, as if I had some grand plan for the future. But the truth was I didn't know. I'd spent so much time consumed by revenge that I hadn't considered what life would look like afterward. One evening, I found her sitting at the dining table, staring at a glass of untouched wine. The woman who once carried herself with unshakable confidence now seemed small, almost childlike. For a moment, I thought about speaking to her, asking her why she had done it, why she had chosen someone else. But the words caught in my throat. What was the point? Instead, I left her there, retreating to the solitude of our bedroom. As I lay in the dark, my mind raced with possibilities. Could I forgive her? Could I even forgive myself? The idea felt impossible, but so did the thought of living in this limbo forever. The next morning, I woke early, the weight of indecision pressing down on me. I stood by the window, watching the first light of dawn creep over the horizon. The world outside seemed so simple, so orderly, compared to the mess I had made of my life. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to consider an ending that didn't involve punishment or revenge. Maybe it was time to leave, to walk away from the wreckage and start over. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild, to salvage something from the ruins of our marriage. The choice wasn't clear, and perhaps it never would be. But as the sun rose higher in the sky, I felt a small flicker of hope. Hope that, whatever came next, it would be the beginning of something new.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.